Welcome everyone to Things Around 8. Dear friends, in this video we will talk about Nicolas Maduro's order to close all of Venezuela's borders, completely isolating the country and preventing the entry of international observers. Could this be the first measure aimed at a coup in Sunday's elections? And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news. On Friday, July 26, in an unexpected measure, Nicolas Maduro ordered the closure of all land, sea and air borders of Venezuela. During the day, hundreds of flights bound for Venezuela were cancelled, and more than 100 international observers, such as deputies, senators and even former presidents of other countries, were prevented from traveling or were even summarily deported from Venezuela. But curiously, despite the fact that more than 100 observers were prevented from entering or were simply expelled from the country, Celso Amorim, Lula da Silva's chief advisor, was the only one who managed to land in Venezuela yesterday, and was even received by ministers and personal advisors of Nicolas Maduro. For those who don't remember, Celso Amorim was the one who, despite Maduro having removed his main opponents from the elections, having threatened to start a war if he is not elected, having imposed censorship in the country by closing dozens of news websites and having closed Venezuela's borders to prevent the entry of observers for the elections, said that the presidential elections will help to show that democracy is consolidated in Venezuela. Could this complete closure of the borders and the expulsion and prohibition of entry of international observers represent the first step in a planned coup to rig the elections? Just to give some context, after Maria Corina Machado's candidacy was disqualified, the opposition managed to register Edmundo Gonzalez's candidacy, with Maria Corina making a huge effort and mobilizing the support of the entire opposition for this candidacy. The result of all this effort can be measured in the electoral polls, with several institutes registering an advantage of more than 40 points for Edmundo Gonzalez. In fact, it was because of all this disadvantage in the polls that Maduro threatened to start a war if he is not elected. That threat of war, made at a rally and repeated in an interview, is proof that Nicolas Maduro knows he is at a disadvantage and that he really fears being defeated in the elections. It is important to remember that Maduro completely controls the CNE, the acronym for the National Electoral Council, a body created by Hugo Chavez in 1999, with the responsibility of organizing and coordinating the elections in the country, which obviously includes counting the votes, which means that, in practice, it is Nicolas Maduro who counts the votes. The problem for Maduro in this case is the international observers. Elections are obviously very important events in any democracy, so it is crucial that there is no fraud, and the best way to prevent this is through the participation of independent international observers. These are usually organizations, politicians and former politicians who travel to the countries to observe the voting and the vote counting process. They are prohibited from intervening, and their role is limited to closely observing the entire process. If there is any sign of fraud or misconduct, everything is duly recorded and shown to the world. And so, when the leader of a country has plans to rig the elections, the first measure he takes is to prevent these observers from attending. For example, this is what Alexander Lukashenko, in power in Belarus for 30 years, did in the 6 consecutive presidential elections that he won. And that is what Vladimir Putin, who has been in power in Russia for 24 years, did in the 2024 presidential elections, which he won with almost 90% of the votes. Therefore, what Maduro did this Friday, by expelling and banning international observers for the elections on the 28th, was simply copying a common practice of dictatorships and autocracies. And so, the answer to the question in the title of the video is probably yes. Nicolas Maduro, knowing that he has a high chance of being defeated at the polls, is probably planning to rig the elections. And to do this, the first step involves, precisely, preventing the presence of international observers. By completely closing the borders, Maduro is also preventing the entry of Venezuelans who have been living in exile outside the country for years. Today, in 2024, Venezuelans represent the national group with the largest number of refugees on the planet. Not even Ukraine, which has been invaded, destroyed and devastated by Vladimir Putin since 2022, has so many refugees living in other countries. Out of a population of 28 million, around 7.7 million Venezuelans have been forced to leave the country, fleeing the oppression and misery created by Nicolas Maduro. millions of votes that Maduro knows will go directly to the opposition. Therefore, by closing Venezuela's borders, Maduro, in addition to preventing the presence of observers for Sunday's elections, also prevented the opposition from receiving millions of votes from Venezuelans who could temporarily return to the country to exercise their right to vote. All of this, combined with the actions and statements over the last few months, indicate that Maduro is effectively preparing to rig the elections and consolidate his dictatorship in Venezuela. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any news.